Hi there and welcome to another Basics webinar for the iPad 101 out of the box tips for successful implementation. I have previously done a version of this, but since iOS 7 there have been a number of changes to the way that we do things and also to some of the additional accessibility settings that there are. So this is the updated version for the latest operating system. My name's Katie and I'm one of the speech pathologists on the consultancy team at Spectronics, and this is the rest of my team. We have Greg O'Connor, Amanda Hartman and Charlene Cullen. This is part of the Spectronics online subscription, and there are a heap of other topics that you may be interested in checking out on spectronics.com.au/online. But today we are looking at the basics, and this came about because we have been recently on a tour, an iPad tour, doing lots and lots of workshops, and it occurred to us that there are many tips and tricks and accessibility settings that people still aren't aware of, and it can really make the difference between successful or unsuccessful implementation of the iPad in your classrooms for the students that you're supporting with diverse learning needs. So this webinar is just purely for an overview and a very basic look at some of those tips and tricks. We'll take a very brief look at the hardware, the restrictions or the parental control section of the iPad, because there are a number of restrictions that can be really useful for when you're working with students with the iPad that allow you to restrict access to various functions and parts of the iPad. And we'll also take a very brief look at multitasking gestures. And then we'll hone in on some accessibility settings, including those that are for vision and hearing, so things like speak selection and voiceover. And we'll also take a look at guided touch and some of the physical and motor settings such as AssistiveTouch, and probably the most exciting addition to the iOS 7, which is switch control. So we will take a look at these accessibility settings within this webinar. So first up, let me just briefly go over the hardware of the iPad. And this is the nuts and bolts. So whilst there's not a lot of buttons and ports and switches, it is important to know what each of them are called or referred to, because there are lots of tips and tricks that you can do with these buttons and combinations of these buttons and switches. So I will just briefly go over the hardware. So if you've got the iPad orientated to you in a portrait orientation, we'll start from number 1. So that button with the circle and then the square inside it is called the home button. So that allows you to get back to the home page if you are within a few pages of your iPad. If you touch that, it will allow you to go back to the home page. And it will also, with a combination of other buttons, allow you to do some other things. I'll also refer to triple clicking the home button to get access to different menus. So that's that home button there. Number 2 refers to the charging port. So that's where your charger will connect to, and you either have a standard port, a standard charger, or more recently with with the newer devices you have a lightning port, which is a much smaller opening there. So that obviously allows you to charge the device, and it also can be a connection for some of the accessories that will allow you to project the iPad, and some of the third-party accessories as well use those connections. Number 3 is just the speaker. You might want to attach some additional speakers, but this is just the inbuilt speaker of the iPad, and it's suitable for most situations. However, I have worked with some people who are using the iPad as a communication device, and they do find that they do need a louder speaker for communication in some circumstances, so in some very noisy environments, for example. Number 4, up the top right corner of the device, that's the sleep-wake button. So the sleep-wake or on-off button. However, if you just click it once, it will only put the device to sleep. It won't actually turn it off. To turn the device off, you need to hold that button down for a series of seconds, about 5 seconds I think it is, and it will come up with an option to slide to power off. And that is the way that you actually turn your device completely off. If you just select the sleep-wake button on and off, it's just putting the device to sleep. It's not actually shutting it down. Okay, number 5 there is the camera. So the camera there, it's the rear-facing camera, so which obviously allows you to take photos and store them directly into your camera roll. Number 6 refers to the side switch. Now this can be set to either mute the device, so mute it on and off, or it can be set to lock rotation, and though that can be specified within the settings. However, I usually like to keep it on locking rotation because I know it can be very distracting for some kids if you're constantly moving the screen around and it's jumping. So I like to keep that side switch so I can lock and unlock the rotation easily. Number 7 refers to the volume up and down, so that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just a little slider bar there for the volume up and down. And number 8 is the audio port. So that is where I can put headphones or attach an external speaker, for example. It's just an audio jack in the top of the device there. Okay, so now we'll start on some of the tips and tricks, and then I'll take you into some further settings and the accessibility settings also that are included in iOS 7. So just in terms of some very general tips and tricks that really can help the iPad to be implemented successfully with the students or the clients that you're working with. In terms of organisation, you might find that you are getting more and more apps and you want to organise these in a more logical way. And you can see on the front page there that I have some apps that are just the single app shown, but you can also see that I have some folders. And if I go into one of those folders, you can see that I can scroll through that folder to see the apps that are included in there. Now, just to set up your folders, what you do is, let's just go to a page with some single apps there. And what you do is just hold down on one of the apps until they go into what I like to call jiggle mode. And then what you can do is drop one on top of the other, and that automatically puts it into a folder. Now, what's different in iOS 7 is that in iOS 6 and previous versions of the operating system, you could only have a limited number of apps in each folder. So what you used to have to do was to rename folders and call it, if you had more than the allowed number of apps in a folder, you'd have to call it folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, etc. But now you can have many more apps in the folders, and what you can do is just swipe through, as I did with the other folder, swipe through to the next pages. So it will only display 9 apps at a time, but you can scroll through the pages quite easily to access the other apps. Now, whilst we're in here, what I can also do is change the title of my folders. So if I want to title it something more logical, actually, photography was a great one for that one, but I can change the title there, and when I come out, they're still in jiggle mode. All I need to do to get out of jiggle mode is to hit the home button, the round button with the square inside it, and it will stop the apps from jiggling. Now, you may have noticed when I held down on one of those apps that I had the grey circle with the cross in it. Now what that does, if I hit that, it will actually ask me if I want to delete the app and all of its data. Now, of course, if it's not that I'm losing it forever, because it's attached to my iTunes account, my iTunes Apple ID, so I can just download it again. But it may be an issue if you're running out of space and there are some apps that you don't use, for example, that you can delete some of those apps and then download them at a later time. The other thing that you can do whilst they're in jiggle mode is you can move the folders around. So like we moved the app on top of the other app to make a folder, you can also move any of the apps or any of the folders around to organize your device more easily. Okay, let's go back to the home page. Now, one feature that I use all the time is Spotlight Search. And previously, you needed to click the home button whilst you're on the home page to get into Spotlight Search. But all I do now is just, with my index finger, scroll down on the screen and you can see that up comes Spotlight Search. And what this does is it allows me to search any part of my iPad for specific things. Now, I've got it just to search for apps. So what I can do if I want to search for an app, for example, is start to type the letters in the app and the app title, and it will come up with everything that matches that search term. So it's a really easy way of remembering or locating where you've put those hundreds of apps that you have downloaded. And then I can just simply click on it and it will open that app for me. Now, I will show you in the settings app how you can specify what it searches for, but you can basically get it to search for anything within your device. So not only apps, but you can get it to search for contacts or emails or web pages or anything within your device. So it is a very, very handy tool that I use a lot, because as you can see, when you start to collect more and more apps, and you can always organize them in different ways, and so I find it really hard to remember which folder I've stored every single app under. So I use Spotlight Search a lot. As in previous versions, if I double click the home button, it will show me my previously used apps. Now, what's different about this is we used to just get a bar across the bottom, but as you can see now, we not only get the app icon, but we get a thumbnail of the page and how it's displayed. So I can see in my Safari app I have that page displayed. In my Notes app I have that note displayed. So it gives you an indication of not only if you can't remember what app you're looking for, but it gives you an indication of what was running on that app when you were previously using it. Now, in order to close down these apps, so these are just running in the background, and you may want to, for the purposes of increasing battery life, you may want to close down these apps. Now, this isn't getting rid of them altogether, it's just closing them down. So it's not like before when we were deleting the app and all of its data, it's actually just force closing them. And how I can do that is just swipe up on the app and it will close those apps down. So that's a little different in iOS 7 as well. When I'm on the home page, one other thing that I can do now is just to swipe up and it gives me access to this control panel. Now, what's really handy about this is that it gives me access to some previously non-accessible items unless I went into the settings app. So things like turning it directly onto airplane mode, which I won't do because I'll get disconnected, turning on or off Wi-Fi, turning on or off Bluetooth, the do not disturb, and also the mute, which was previously accessible. But also you can see on the right hand side there, it can take you directly into your timer app and also your camera app. So it gives you a lot more control over getting directly into some of the features that you used to have to go into the settings app and try and find which just wasted time. So this is a much more efficient way of accessing those controls. A couple of other little tips and tricks that you may or may not know about is things like using, if we just go into we're just going into Google Images here. So if I'm gone into Google Images and there's an image that I want to save directly into my camera roll, I just click on the image and hold my finger down, and you can see that I have the option of saving the image there. And if I save the image, it will save that directly into my camera roll. The other thing is, if I need to take a screenshot. Now, I can take a screenshot of wherever I am. So for example, let's just go back into Proloquo to go. If I wanted to take a screenshot of my page set to show somebody my page set, I can just simply hold the home button, so that's the round button as I showed you in the hardware section, and also the sleep wake button, so the one up in the top right corner of the device. Hold both of those down at the same time, and you may have heard that little camera noise, and what that does is save the screenshot directly into my camera roll. So now if I go into my camera roll, you can see there that I have the screenshot as an image of my page set, and also the screenshot of the image that I saved, so direct from Google Images. So both of those tips can be really handy, obviously, with apps that don't, for example, have publishing features where you can share children's stories or artwork or whatever they've created on their device. You can always take a screenshot of what they've created and email it home. And also when you're creating things like visual supports and you need those images and you don't have access to those images, or you can't take pictures, you can use that save images option within any sort of web page. For the next few tips and tricks and the restrictions and settings, I'm going to go into the Settings app. Now you can see that my Settings app is on the bar down the bottom there, the second one in. And what I haven't mentioned is this bar down the bottom, no matter what page I'm on, that bar down the bottom will always be accessible. So it's like the dock, where you can always dock apps that you use frequently so that you can have easy access to those, regardless of what page you have displayed in the top viewport. If I select the Settings app, I can come into the Settings app. Now I have, if you can see in that left-hand viewport there, we're not going to go through all of the settings here, but you can see in the left-hand viewport there I have General selected, and in the right-hand viewport I have all of the options under General. You can see also in the left-hand viewport that you have things like access to airplane mode, access to Wi-Fi, access to Bluetooth, but remember now we have much more easy access to those using the control panel just by simply swiping up. Okay, under the General Settings app, there are a lot of things that you can do to individualize the iPad for the student that you're working with, which you may or may not know about. And one of the first things I want to show you is that you can change the text size. So you can see in that second box on the right hand side, text size is the third option down. Now what I can do in there, this says apps that support dynamic type will adjust to your preferred reading size below. So if I need my text to be larger, in a lot of the apps that support this dynamic type, things like Notes, Safari, a lot of the Apple native apps, I can just simply drag that to a larger font, Now when I go out of it and go into my reminders, for example, you can see that the font is larger. Go back into the settings, drag it smaller, into reminders, and you can see that it adjusts the text to being smaller. So that can be just a default setting that you can change to your preferred font size or to the student's preferred reading size. Now there is an option to make it even larger, but I'll show you that under accessibility. Let's come back out there and let me show you one other thing before we go into restrictions. And this one is under keyboard. So let me show you under keyboard. And one other thing is these shortcuts. So you can see down the bottom there. Now there's lots of other settings, obviously you can see how many settings, but I'm just showing the ones that are probably the most relevant to the students that we're supporting. Now if I'm supporting someone who has a severe physical disability, it may be effortful for them to use the keyboard, and so I want it to be as efficient as possible. And one way of doing that is to set up abbreviations, so shortcuts. So you can see down the bottom there that I have set up a shortcut to be, I think the default one is OMW, so on my way. So if I use the inbuilt Apple keyboard on any of the apps such as Notes, Reminders, etc., and type OMW, it will automatically expand to on my way. And you can add custom shortcuts. So you can see the one above that there, I've added MNK, and that expands to, or my name Katie, that expands to hi, my name is Katie, because that might be a phrase that I want to type a lot. To add a new shortcut, for example, you can come in here, type in the phrase that you want, the full phrase that you want. I live in Melbourne. And the shortcut might be live. It can be whatever you want it to be. Save that. Now let's just come out and see how that works. I'm going to go into my Notes app and I'm going to go to a new line and just type in MNK, and you can see that it gives me the option to expand. So if I just select space, it will expand that to hi, my name is Katie. So now, instead of typing 20 or so letters, I need to only type 3 letters and it will expand it out. So much less effort for me and much more efficient. And let's have a look at our, we did live, didn't we? And it now gives me the option to say I live in Melbourne. Now I might also want to just write live, so I can just select on that little cross there to close that option down in the auto text and still write just live. Okay, now let's go into, there's lots of other things in here around auto lock and passcode lock, etc. So do you want the screen to auto lock? Obviously that saves batteries. And background app refresh, so if you're in a Wi-Fi zone, do you want the apps that are running in the background to refresh or not? Obviously using up data and battery, so you need to be aware of that sort of thing. So lots of handy tips in there. One other thing I will show you is using the side switch, and you can see there it's in the middle of the screen on the right hand side. Using side switch to lock rotation or to mute. Now what this does is that side switch, I can specify whether I want, when I select that side switch, at the moment you can see I've got lock rotation, or I can change it to mute. So I'm just selecting the side switch, the hardware switch on the side of the device. But I usually set it to lock rotation because I find it disorientating when it's constantly flipping. So I like the option of being able to lock the rotation of the screen. Okay. One last thing I'll show you before we go into restrictions is multitasking gestures, which is now in the center of the screen there. You can see how many things there are included under this general settings app. Multitasking gestures. Now, at the moment I have that turned on, and what that allows me to do is to use multitasking gestures to more efficiently navigate my device. And you can see there that it's got some options. So use 4 or 5 fingers to pinch to the home screen. So if I use 5 fingers and just do a large pinch on the screen, it will take me to the home screen no matter where I am. You can see it will swipe up to the multitasking bar, or I can swipe left or right between apps. So you can see if I'm swiping left there, you can't see me doing that, but I'm swiping left and it's taking me to each of the previously used apps. The other way I can obviously get to that is by double clicking the home button, as I said, and going into the app that we want to navigate that way. Now, for some of the students that we're working with, they may not actually get what they're actually doing using multitasking gestures, and so they may accidentally pinch and not know that they're purposely going to the home screen. So I can actually turn that option off, and then when I pinch, it's not actually performing that multitasking gesture. And I find that it's a lot more simple for a lot of the kids that we're supporting and not so cognitively loaded. Okay, now I've been talking about restrictions and I haven't gone in there. So you can see now that in that center box there, the third option down is called restrictions. Now this is an area that not a lot of people are aware of, but that can be really handy when you're supporting young children or even people who may need some additional support in restricting access to various parts of the device. So I'll just show you, and it's often referred to as the parental control area of the iPad, but I'll just show you what you do. So it is passcode protected. So if we go into restrictions, it's going to ask me for my passcode, and once I'm in there, you can see that it will restrict access to various parts of the device. I can restrict access to Safari, so to the internet. And now what that's doing is it's not deleting the app. All it's doing is restricting access temporarily. And I might want to do that if I'm in an assessment situation and I don't want the students to be able to access content on the web. The next thing is restricting access to the camera. So if you've worked with anyone who is completely obsessed by the camera and all they want to do is go into the camera and take photos, you can restrict access temporarily to that so that you have appropriate times where they can use the camera. And then you can see that you can restrict access to things like the iTunes store, so they can't buy music, for example, accidentally. You can restrict access to installing apps and deleting apps. Now this can be really useful. If you've got, you know that within some apps that you can automatically install other apps, or you can accidentally delete apps, as we showed you with just hitting the cross button. Now students may not be aware that they're actually doing that, or they may be doing it on purpose. So we can actually restrict that ability. So for example, if we turn off the ability to delete apps, come out of this restrictions area, now when I go onto wiggle mode, so just hold down on an app, you can see that I no longer have the ability to delete that app. So before I had the little cross come up, now I don't have that option. Okay, I've come back out to general here. Let's go into restrictions. Okay, so that can be a really handy thing, being able to restrict the ability to delete apps. In-app purchases, we know that a lot of the free or light versions of apps have in-app purchases, and this can be very tempting for little fingers to just go and try and get the other version of the app, for example. We can turn off the ability to purchase within an app. But the other thing that you can do, there's a lot around content and the ratings, etc., which I won't go into. But the other thing that you can do, which I find really useful, is see this require password for purchases. The default setting is that it is set to 15 minutes. Now, if I go in there and select immediately, what that means is that every time I need to make a purchase, it will immediately ask for my password. And if I don't have that, then I'm not able to purchase anything. Now, this can be obviously useful because if I've got it set to 15 minutes and I've just downloaded an app to use in a classroom or to use with a student that I'm supporting, within 15 minutes, that student can then go and purchase other things. So I always set this to immediately, and therefore they will need a password every time they want to purchase an app. Okay, that's enough within restrictions. There's a lot more to explore. This is kind of just an overview, but now this leads me on to accessibility. And accessibility is a huge area within the iPad, and Apple have made a huge commitment to making the iPad accessible for people. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through some of the accessibility settings that might be relevant to the people that you're supporting, just around the basics. You can see firstly that accessibility, the actual option, has been moved up in the menu. So it used to be, you used to have to scroll right down the bottom of the general settings app, but now it's been moved up to near the top. So if we go into accessibility, you can see there's a number of accessibility settings under vision, under hearing, under learning, and under physical and motor. Now, what I'm going to cover is just an overview of some of the main features, and again, an overview of possibly the most exciting addition to this accessibility menu, which is the switch control for people with physical or motor difficulties. Let me go back up the top and let me just whiz you through a few of these. So, VoiceOver. VoiceOver is a great feature for people with limited vision. Now, I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail today, but basically what it does, first of all, before you, I should mention, before you explore any of these accessibility settings, so that you don't get yourself lost, what I want you to do is to come right down the bottom and go to this accessibility shortcut, which used to be called triple click home in previous versions of the operating systems. If I go into accessibility shortcut, I can select which of the accessibility options I want to be able to access by triple clicking the home button. Now, this gets me out of a lot of trouble if I get a bit lost within these accessibility settings. So I just like to make sure that I have them all ticked, because what that means is if I get lost when I'm exploring VoiceOver, which for new users you most likely will, what I can do to get out of that is just to triple click the home button and I can turn it off. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's now go up to VoiceOver, and I started talking about what VoiceOver was. VoiceOver speaks the items on the screen. So for someone with low vision or who is blind, what they can do is just drag their finger across the screen and it will speak out all of the menu options and all of the items on the screen. What is confusing for someone just exploring this is that you need to perform a couple of different things depending on what you want to do. So one is tap once to select the item and hear it read out. The second is double tap to activate that selected item. Now you can double tap anywhere on the screen. You don't have to double tap on that item. So I'll give you an example of how this works. If I turn it on.
VoiceOver on. Settings. Landscape. Home button to the left. Wi-Fi. KG Lion. Button. Bluetooth. Off. Button. Voice over. Speak. Airplane mode. Off.
You can see that as I drag my finger across the screen, it speaks out the options. Now, what I can do when I want to, I won't turn that on, but what I can do when I want to go into
Wi-Fi, cellular data, button,
an option,
voice over, on, double tap to toggle setting.
If I want to select that setting, I need to double tap, and I can double tap anywhere on the screen.
Voiceover.
And you can see I just turned that voiceover off because I don't want to explore it in too much detail. But I encourage you to have a go at it, but I want you to remember to make sure that, because if we turn it on,
voiceover on, settings,
make sure that you've set that shortcut, which is triple click home.
Alert, accessibility options.
So that I can turn
voiceover off.
The voiceover off by double tapping on that option in the menu. So that's voiceover. You can obviously increase the speaking rate, slow it down, and there's a lot more within the voiceover option. One other thing, if we go back out under vision, that I want to show you is to speak selection. Now, speak selection, whilst it is under the vision category, speak selection is an amazing tool for students with literacy difficulties. If we select speak selection and go in there and make sure speak selection is turned on, I encourage you to always turn speak selection on because the default is that it is turned off. What that allows me to do is, if I come out into an app, say like my notes, if I hold on a piece of text and highlight a selection of text, you can see that in that top menu bar, the last option is to speak that text. Now, if I had speak selection turned off, that wouldn't appear, but because I've got it turned on in accessibility settings, I can speak.
A snake is a member of about 19 reptile families, order serpents, order Squamata, that has no limbs, voice, ears, or eyelids. They also have a long, slender body, too.
It's doing a couple of things there. I'll just show you. Let's go back into our settings. It is speaking it using an English Australia voice. There's a lot of new voices available within the updated iOS operating system. I can obviously change the rate of that speaking voice, but also I've selected it to highlight the words, to provide that extra visual cue to aid my comprehension, so that as it's speaking aloud, it's highlighting each of the words that it's speaking. But I can also turn that off, but it is a really handy feature to have turned on. Okay, so that's speak selection. So they're the two main ones that I want to show you under the vision category, voiceover and speak selection. The next box there, I'll just show you the larger type. Now, remember I said that with those apps that support dynamic type, things like notes, reminders, etc., there was a option in the previous menu, just under the general menu, to have it so that it's larger or smaller. And you can see here that you can actually make it larger or small. It's just you can actually make it even bigger within here for if I turn on that larger dynamic type. And now we go out to say notes. You can see there that the text is huge. So you're further enhancing the size of the text for people with visual difficulties. Let's just go back there, turn that off and come out. But it might be useful for some of the people that you're supporting to make that, let's just cancel that, to make that more accessible. Now, the last three things that I'm going to focus on just within accessibility is guided access under learning, switch control under physical and motor, and assistive touch. And because this is a basics webinar, I don't want to get into them in too much detail, but I do want to demonstrate them and talk about why you might use them. If we go into, you can see guided access. Guided access is a very handy tool that allows you to lock someone into just one app, into a single app. And it also allows you to control which features are available within that app. So what I want to show you is, let's get our Proloquo to go up here. So there might be, let's have a look. Well, let's go into the notes section again. It's taken it back to the text there. There might be areas of an app that you don't want a student to access. Now, what I can do to turn it on, because I have it selected under that shortcut, if I triple click, you can see guided access is one of the options in my triple click menu or my shortcut menu. I'll select guided access. Now, what guided access does is it's firstly asking me, circle the areas on the screen you would like to disable. Now, within this notes app, for example, I might not want the student to access the rest of the notes. Oh, that didn't work very well, but I can always just extend that. And I may not want the student to be able to either delete the note, yes, okay, what's that doing? It's not circling very well. To be able to delete the note or send the note off or to write a new note. I may just want them to be able to access. It's not circling the screen very well like it usually does, but anyway, I might just want them to be able to access the text in this existing note, for example. Now, I can also come in here and specify whether I want the student to be able to access the sleep and wake button, make them selectable, or the volume button. So these can all be disabled within guided access. Now, what it actually means is if I start that, you can see that those areas of the screen are now grayed out and I can't actually access, I can only access that middle viewport. Now, this might also, if I triple click home, it will ask me for my guided access passcode and I can just end that. This might also, let me show you another example. Proloquo to go. This might also be useful for someone who's using the iPad as their communication device and you don't want them to be able to access all of the other features of the iPad. You want it to purely be a dedicated communication device. And what that means is that I can triple click, oops, sorry, no, it's just confused it. Triple click again. Oops, my triple click wasn't working, sorry about that. Triple click again, turn guided access on, and I can select the parts of the screen that I want them to be able to access, that I don't want them to be able to access. So say, for example, the setting and the edit button down there. Start guided access. Now I can't access that and I can't exit out of the app. Every time I hit the home button to try and exit out of my app, it will say that it's enabled and I need to triple click to put the password in. So a way of turning it into a dedicated communication device, but also a way of restricting access to just one app for students who might be in an assessment task, for example. Triple click again, passcode enabled, and then I can just, you can see in the top left corner, I can just end that. Now, within the settings app, under guided access, you can see that the accessibility shortcut, if I turn that on, it will remember the settings within that app. So if I turn that on, it will remember which parts I've grayed out, and I don't have to do it every time I go into that app. Okay, a really handy feature for just locking a student into one app for a various number of reasons. Okay, so now this brings me to the physical and motor section of the accessibility settings. And the one I want to show you first is AssistiveTouch. Now, AssistiveTouch has always been there. What AssistiveTouch allows me to do is if you have difficulty touching the screen with multiple fingers, or if you need to use a head pointer, for example, that has the correct material on the end of it to be compatible with the screen, capacitive material, or if I need to use a stylus to access the screen, if I have physical disabilities that don't allow me to access the small buttons on the screen very well, I can turn AssistiveTouch on, and you can see that a little black button appears up in the top screen. Now I can drag that around. What AssistiveTouch allows me to do is access a lot of the features of the device and functions of the device with just one index finger, that would have required more than that, or with an adaptive accessory such as a head pointer or a stylus. So when I select that little menu, what comes up is some options. So I can activate Siri just with one finger. So this is for people who can't hold down the home button to access Siri traditionally. I can access Siri and up it will come. I can select directly on the home button and it will take me to my home page rather than having to physically access the home button. I can go into device there, and what that allows me to do is to perform actions that I may not be able to do physically myself. So I can turn the volume up, I can turn the volume down, just with one finger, a stylus or a head pointer, for example. I can lock the rotation of my screen, I can unlock the rotation of my screen. So if I can't access the side switch, I can do it all through AssistiveTouch. I can rotate the screen. So if my device is mounted and I want the device rotated, for example, I can lock the screen, or I can go into more and I can take a screenshot of the screen. So if I can't physically access the home button and the sleep wake button to take the screenshot, you can see that this feature allows you to perform actions that may have been difficult before or impossible before with just one finger or an adaptive accessory. A really very, very handy tool for those who have physical access issues. The other thing that I can do is set up some favorites. So for example, if I want to be able to perform a 5-finger pinch as a multitasking gesture, I can set up a custom gesture. If I want to perform a triple click, I can set up a custom gesture. I can set up new gestures, record new gestures within the settings app. So here are the custom gestures that I've set up, and you can see here that I can create a new gesture there as well. Okay, to turn this off, because I have the shortcut enabled, I can just triple click and turn AssistiveTouch off. Okay. Now the last thing that I want to talk about within accessibility is switch control, which is listed first there. And this is possibly the most exciting addition to ios7, because what it allows us to do is to control the iPad with a switch. Now I'll talk about what I mean by the different switches in just a moment, but prior to this we have had some switch control with a switch interface, but this is actually built into the operating system of the iPad. So it's much more seamless and is able to control a lot more. And it's a much more traditional way of switching and scanning that you may, or that your students may be used to. And I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of this because there are so many settings within this, and this is just a basics webinar. But what I will do is direct you to a blog post that Charlene Cullen has developed that gives you a lot more information on the many settings that you can select within this switch control. I just want to give you an overview of the basics and how it works. So as it says there, switch control allows you to use your iPad by sequentially highlighting items on the screen that can be activated through an adaptive accessory. So obviously for students with a physical disability who aren't able to access directly the screen either with their hand or with something like a head pointer or a stylus, switching and scanning will allow them to be able to do this. So one thing that I want to make sure that I have turned on before I start exploring is if we come back to the accessibility menu and make sure that accessibility shortcut has switch control selected also. And then if we go into switch control and we make sure that we have auto scanning selected, that will make it work just with one switch scanning. Now if we turn switch control on, you can just visibly see the cursor or the border scanning the various sections of the screen. And when I want to, we haven't got any switches set up yet, so it's not actually going to do anything. But you can see that it will stop after 2 rounds or 2 loops of it going through those options. But I want to add a switch, so you can see on the second option there I have the option of adding a switch, so let's add a switch. We'll add a new switch. Now the source for switching can be external, so I can add an external switch. So a lot of the external switches that have been used with the iPad previously can be used. I can use the screen as a switch. So that means that the whole screen can be used to select an item on the screen that is currently highlighted. So that's kind of a very basic way of using it. Or I can use the camera as a source for my switch. Now what that allows me to do is to use head movements. It will use the camera within the device to recognize head movements as a way of selecting what is currently scanned or selected on the screen. Just for a very basic demonstration, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to add a screen as a switch. So let's go into screen and we'll choose full screen, and we'll choose that when we select anywhere on the screen, it's going to select that item. Okay, now it's still actually scanning at the moment, so it's probably a bit confusing, but let's go back into switch control. So now you can see it's scanning through, and I have one switch selected. I selected anywhere on the screen, and now it's just going through the options available in that menu. It will start again because it's set to go for 2 loops. So let me start that again. And I'm selecting anywhere on the screen. Let me select that one and we'll go back to accessibility, for example. Now let's get back into switch control. So I'm going to wait until that section is highlighted and then press anywhere on the screen, and again, anywhere on the screen. And let's turn switch control off. So you can see that it would take a little bit of practice for someone who's quite new to it, but that was going through quite fast as well. Now there are a few settings that you can change. This is just a very basic demonstration using the whole screen as a switch. But under timing you can see there that you've got auto scanning time. Now I can increase or decrease my scanning time. So that will then give me longer or shorter period of time before it scans onto the next item. It's set to be, I think, for 1 second, but if you're exploring, you might want to increase it a little bit just so that it moves a bit slower so that you can get your head around how to use it. And then under timing, we've also got loops. So as I was saying before, it was going through 2 loops or two cycles of scanning things before it stopped. But I can also, and most people that I've worked with would only want it to go through once, twice, or maybe even 3 times. But you can go up to 10 times if you're very new to the scanning and you want it to be able to go through a number of times before you have to select it again. You can also fiddle with switch stabilization. So hold duration. So what that does is I can specify how much time I need to hold on the screen or hold on the switch before it's recognized as a selection. So that's really good for people who might accidentally hit their switch and who need to have a definite press before they select it. So that's hold duration. The other thing under that switch stabilization is ignore repeat, and that can also be helpful for people who accidentally have multiple presses. So for people who might hit the switch and then hit it again unintentionally, that will allow the person to not to ignore that accidental press or that repeated press. Okay, the last thing I'll just talk about is, or the couple of last things is, under audio we can choose to have speech turned on, which will use a similar voice to what VoiceOver showed, to speak out the items that are selected before you actually select them, so like auditory scanning for those people who need that auditory cue. And the other thing is that I can choose to group items. So as you can see, when it was doing it for me, it was grouping all of the things on the left-hand side as one option, and then if I selected that, then it would break it down into the 3 groups. If I have that turned off, it will just go through every option individually, but it might be a much more laborious process. So you might have to wait a lot longer to access various parts of the screen because you have to wait for each individual one to be scanned. So I often turn on group items so that it allows faster navigation, because switching and scanning can obviously be very slow for some people. And then, of course, with the scanning, you can choose whether you have the cursor or the border that's around the options larger, and what colour you have that as well for people who have specific visual preferences. Okay, as I said, that is a very brief overview of switch control, but it's exciting to see that that's included in iOS 7. What I will do is direct you to Shah's blog post, where she has written a much more detailed version and linked to videos and other written resources around more settings to do with switch control. So if you're interested in exploring this more, or if it's more relevant for some of the students that you're supporting, you can go into it in a lot more depth by just going directly to bit.ly/speco switch control, and that will direct you straight to her blog post, which has a lot of links, helpful links, useful links in there. Okay, so so that's a bit of an overview of the iPad basics and some of the accessibility settings. I would encourage you to have a play yourself, but for more information about various apps that might be suitable for the students that you're supporting, we've got a couple of lists that you might want to explore: the apps for special education list and the apps for literacy support list. which have a number of apps listed, but also evaluated according to various fields like accessibility and publishing and those sorts of things that make them so that you don't have to go and test them yourself. We've done a lot of the background work for you. So thanks for listening today. We hope you found this useful, and there are a lot more webinars available on spectronics.com.au/online, and we encourage you to have a look at what else is out there. And if this is all really exciting for you, I encourage you to also have a look at our program for the Inclusive Learning Technologies Conference, because there are some fantastic keynote presenters confirmed and a great schedule up there on our website under the conference to have a look at the sessions that are involved. If you're not part of our Spectronics online community already, I encourage you to join our Facebook page and our Twitter feed, and also subscribe to our blog, because we are constantly posting lots of new resources up there that are along the lines of this sort of thing, but also extending your knowledge as well. And this has been an example of online resources and training that we provide, but we can tailor something direct for your staff. So if you do have specific training needs, I encourage you to contact consultants at spectronics.com.au and discuss your training needs with them. Thanks again for coming along today.